Hello quilt friends, it is Friday again, so we are ready for our next step in our sew along. We are on week 4 of the Winter Wonders sew along, and this week we get to do something fun. We get to make our snowman face. So we're going to start by making the eyes, which have some, I will warn you, some teeny tiny folded corners on them. But back when I was making this block, I did a poll on my Instagram channel and I asked people, would you rather piece with teeny tiny folded corners or would you rather applique a circle on your face? And the vote was, I think, 75% in favor of piecing with the tiny folded corners. So there were very few people who actually wanted to applique. So that's what I went with, despite the fact that the pieces are tiny. So they're not hard, and it's not, that fussy, because this block doesn't really have to line up or have any points that have to match anything. So it's not as bad as you would think. We are also going to use a fun technique for making the nose on the snowman. So I like doing this part because it's a little bit different than your standard piecing of, folded corners and half square triangles and all of that. So we're going to use some techniques where we sew and trim and sew and trim. And then when the whole thing is done, we're going to square it up to size and then sew it into our block. So don't worry too much about as you're making it, because there is a little bit of forgiveness there. And then if your nose doesn't turn out perfect, just remember that most snowmen do not have perfect carrot noses. All carrots are a little bit different. So I hope you have fun with that. I hope you enjoy making that face. And then next week, we're gonna come back and have a really fun week then too, because we get to make the little hat on our snowman, and then we get to sew the middle section of the quilt together. So you're actually going to assemble your snowman and put the snowflakes around it and complete the center of your quilt. So then at that point, we're getting close to being halfway. So I hope you're having a good time. And if you have any questions throughout the process of making this block, feel free to leave me a comment in below the video here. And you can also email me at heather@ankastreasures.com. So have a fun week sewing. We'll see you back here again next week. Hello quilt friends. This week we are going to be working on making the snowman face in our Winter Wonders sew along. So we are going to start by making the eye units for the snowman. And I know when you see the cutting instructions, you're going to question my sanity a little bit, because I have you cutting 7/8 inch squares to do these folded corners. And you did read that correctly. They are that small. But the reason I have you doing them so small is that after you are done sewing your seams here, it ends up looking almost round. And so that's just the size that I needed to be at to achieve the look of a snowman eye. So please don't hate me over that. And there are only 2 of them, so you don't have to make very many blocks of this. But we're going to start by doing those folded corners on our block, and it's going to look like this. When you're done sewing, and again, you're going to want to do where you draw the line and stitch on the outside edge, just like we've been talking about, so that allows for the turn of the fabric so you don't lose anything on this teeny tiny square. So being precise on this is going to help and going to pay off. So you're going to do it on all 4 corners. Then you're going to trim the back side out, and you can do that probably a scant quarter, just because those pieces are so small. And then you're going to press, and you're going to have a unit that looks like this. So just pretend that I've done that on both of those units, and then you have some little pieces that you're going to sew on top and bottom to make that eyeball strip there. Then after those seams are taken out, it's going to fit this piece right here. So let's just make that look a little bit shorter. It's going to be like that. And this piece is going to fit here, and then you have 2 wider pieces that are going to fit on either side. So sew all of those together, and that will create the eye unit. Next, we're going to walk through doing the nose. And this is a little bit of a challenge week. In addition to having all these little pieces here, we're going to be working with bias triangles to make the nose. So I'm going to make a few step outs on that, and I'll be right back to walk you through every step of making the nose section. All right, let's get started with our nose section here. So we are on step 9. So you're going to grab your orange and cream triangles, and when you cut this piece, you ended up with 2 of them. You really only need 1 of those, so you can set the extras to the side on both of them, and you're going to keep 1 of each piece. So then what you're going to want to do is lay it out exactly as shown in the picture. So this one needs to be laid like this, and this one needs to be turned like this. So just make sure you don't have it turn the wrong way like that, because that's pretty easy to do. Make sure that it's laid out exactly like the picture. Then you're going to want to lay them right sides together, and again turn to look just like the picture. So we have the cream triangle on top with the long edge where we're going to sew, and then you're going to position this so that this little valley here, so that little point right there is the bottom of the valley is what I'm referring to. Maybe I should point to it with my scissor here. So right there, that needs to line up perfectly with your 1/4 inch seam allowance. So if you want to, you can even lay a ruler down on top, and you can see that my 1/4 inch seam line intersects with that lowest point of the valley. So if you do that, then you know you have it positioned correctly, and then you can just let the rest of this, you can see that the orange one is shorter, you can let the rest of the cream just hang off down below, and you're going to sew that with your 1/4 inch seam. So here's the piece that I've already sewn. There you can see, let's get up nice and close, that we have that 1/4 inch seam in the valley, or pretty close. We are going to do some trimming to size, so it isn't absolutely imperative that you have it lined up perfectly, but that's what we're aiming for. So then you're going to go to the iron and press this unit. Now as you're sewing, just be careful not to, as you're sewing and pressing, be careful not to stretch out this bias edge here and the bias edge along the cream. So the long side on both colored triangles is the bias edge. So just keep that in mind as you're working. Then you're going to go to the iron and you're going to press that seam open. So that's this piece that I have right here. There you can see that seam is open. And this takes you through the end of step 9. So turning your pattern to the next page, step 10 on page 6, and then we're going to get our mat here for trimming. So we want to make sure we get the trimming done correctly. So what you're going to do is lay your ruler across the top edge of the orange, and we're going to just trim this little excess off. Now in the diagram in the pattern, it doesn't show this extra seam allowance here. So depending on which way you've pressed that, you may or may not have that showing when you do your trim. But you see the concept is the same. You're basically just giving yourself a straight edge here to work with. And if you have a rotating mat, you can just turn it, and then all you need to do is cut the width of this piece to 2 1/4 inches. So you're going to have a little uneven looking scrap there that gets trimmed off the end, and there's your 2 1/2 inch wide section. Now we're going to go on to step 11. So turn your piece to match the picture in the pattern. So it'll look like that. Then you're going to take this piece, which is 2 inches by 3 inches, and you're going to position it on this piece. And the thing to notice about this one is we're going to do something a little different. We're going to sew it with a 1/2 inch seam. So if you lay your ruler on there and see where the 1/2 inch seam is, you can tell if this is going to get caught in there or not. You can also tell from the picture and the pattern which way or how to line it up, but you're going to look for, again, that little valley kind of being about where the 1/2 inch seam allowance would line up. So I'm going to go and sew this piece, and then I will come back and help you finish trimming the rest of the block. Okay, so I just watched back through the video, and the last thing I told you was to cut this 2 1/2, and it is actually 2 1/4, which is what the pattern says. So just follow your pattern and make sure that's 2 1/4. Then I have you sewing this with a 1/2 inch seam, and I said I was going to go sew this and come back and show you. And so that's what it's going to look like after it's sewn. And the only thing you really need to watch too closely is that you have a 1/4 inch seam down below here. Now if you don't, there is some wiggle room in that you can go back and take a slightly wider seam right there, and it doesn't have to be necessarily straight. It can be a little bit wider. I mean, the seam needs to be straight. Let me do it with a ruler, but it can be cockeyed just a little bit here to catch a little more of that so that you end up getting a full 1/4 inch beyond that point. So hopefully that makes sense, so that you make sure that you don't end up cutting off the tip of your nose when you do your trimming. So just adjust or reposition that piece if needed. Hopefully you're pretty close to the 1/4. You just don't want it to be less than 1/4, because then when you take this seam, you're going to end up with a flat spot on your nose. So if it's a little bit wider than 1/4, that is fine. You don't need to do any repositioning then. So after you press, then we're going to work on trimming, and we want this to be 6 1/4 inches wide. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to trim this bottom edge. Turn my mat again. Get that nicely lined up. And you can trim across the top again even if you want. Then when we're looking to make this 6 1/4 inches, we want to make sure that we have 1/4 inch of cream past this point here, so that again our nose stays pointy when we get our seam sewn. So I'm just going to go a little bit past 1/4, and then rotate again, and then I'm going to trim on this side 1/4 inch. So you can see there's just a little bit of leeway there. If your nose ends up being slightly one way or the other, it's just fine. You're mainly looking so that you have 1/4 inch beyond these 2 points here. So that's all there is to making the nose unit. So we are going to be positioning it together with some of these other pieces here. And now you can start to see our snowman face starting to take shape. So next we're going to do step 12, which is making the scarf unit. So I'm going to go ahead and go sew that and come back. Then we can sew these snowman pieces together in step 13. I will go sew that, and then I will walk you through the final steps of the assembly. Okay, I'm back with a few more of my snowman pieces. You can see I have my face sewn together, and I have my little pieces sewn together to make the scarf. And what you're going to do next is you're going to sew folded corners in 2 different colors onto the sides of the snowman face. So these need to match this print that's going to go here, and these 2 need to match this print that's going to go here. That also matches these 2 little pieces here. If you notice, these 2 black ones are different widths, so you're going to want to get those in the right position. So after you get everything in the right position and you get those folded corners sewn on there, then you're going to be able to attach this, and you're going to be able to attach this, and then you will have your snowman face complete. So next week we will work on the hat unit, and if you have any questions for me or anything, feel free to leave them in the comments. Otherwise, I will see you back here next week.